Okay.
Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're here to talk about Jimmy Page by Jimmy Page. Your photographic autobiography. Now, first, why have you published this book?
Well, I was asked, I've been asked on numerous occasions to do a book, a written book. And I've got to say that in the past, where people have published books and autobiographies or biographies, I'd look at the books and see what photographs they'd used. And that sort of stuck in my mind that was something like this. It was, or doing a written book or working with somebody with a book. I really just wanted to have something which was a really personal statement. And I thought that the idea of having an autobiography told in photographs, for me, would be a whole career. And that whole sort of thing of every picture tells a story, well, it does if you look very carefully at these. And it basically spans the whole journey of my musical journey and my career. So I just thought it's going to be a bit of an epic task, but I quite enjoy things like that. So,
well, how did you go about putting it together? Because you must have had to go through so much archive material to find the right photographs.
Well, to kick it off, there were sort of photographs in the family archive and my own, if you like, that kicked the whole book off and starts it off. And then it gets to the point of like sessions, and I thought that would be really difficult, that period. And I'm sure we'll come on to all of this. But it was surprising. You know, I had a sort of, obviously, the draft of it, the synopsis of it is where do you start, and the finishing photographs. And I just recalled lots of photographs that I'd like to have used in it, and then it was a question of accessing them through various photographers. It's the biggest problem for anyone else who ever wants to do this is the amount of photographers you've got to deal with. There's about 70-something photographers.
Well, gone too far forward. Let's start with your childhood then. This a photograph that an image of you that we don't often see. What was the role of music in your family home in your childhood?
Yeah, well, it's not a current image, you can imagine. At this point of time, I guess, you know, I'm about 12, I think, something like that, and I'm just about playing guitar, playing a few chords on a round hole like campfire guitar. And actually in those days, to get to hear music, or rock music, it was really difficult because there wasn't that much on the television. And actively, there was like a youth club that you could go to, which would be a church youth club. So sort of if you went in by default, if you sang in the choir, you could go to the youth club, which was all right, because then you could sort of play a bit of music. Not only listen to it, but play sort of with the skiffle group and stuff. So this is, yeah, me there. I actually became head choir boy at one point, so I sort of worked my way up. But the best part of this story is the fact that the photographer was the organist and choir master, and his name was Mr. Coffin. And there'd been some communication from Mr. Coffin's family along the way. They sent another image of it, so I knew they were genuine. And we had to get hold of obviously the photographers to get clearance and copyright on their copyright. And the people of Genesis Press were talking to him, and he said that, to his son-in-law, and he said that he remembered his father-in-law talking about me taking my guitar along to choir practice and trying to get it tuned up to the organ, because I think I had one of these playing a day but Whedon, and it showed you what the notes were, and sort of a futile attempt before somebody actually showed me some chords. But so I'm actually playing guitar at this point, even though there was probably one chord.
So how did rock and roll come into your life?
Okay, well, how did it come into my life?
Yeah.
Well, I think it came out of some speakers, you know, somewhere on the radio or on the television. I think it would be more on the radio that it just came out and took a stranglehold on me, and it just pulled me in and seduced me into the whole world of it and what was going on. I think, well, we know a whole generation was just taken with this whole movement of what was coming out of America.
Yeah.
And that's it. We couldn't, you know, they tried to stop it on the BBC and such like, and to a degree on the television, although there were some programs like Oh Boy and that were pretty cool. But the damage was done.
How did your parents feel about you being in bands? Because, I mean, this is a picture, you're still in your teens, and you're supporting Cliff Richard here.
Well, okay, you know, the other one that is there is, well, the photograph beforehand, I got headhunted out of Epsom where I lived, and the other band were, and this is part of it too, was sort of in like Shoreditch and Islington at the time, and they were very unfashionable areas, and they were still printing newspapers in Shoreditch at that time, literally. So, this guy here, Neil Christian, who was the manager of the guy in the previous photograph, Reddy Lewis, and then he took over. Poor old Reddy Lewis got the Spanish archer, the elbow, and he took over as singer. But the interesting thing about this is that I'm doing sort of body language there at 15 that I'm sort of doing on the 1977 tour in Led Zeppelin. So it's something a bit eerie. I mean, when I went through all these photographs, it was quite interesting to see all these things and actually put them in the book so they would relate like that.
How old were you then when you started playing sessions? And we got you here with the great Jackie DeShannon. And
well, it's not too far after this. It's about sort of 16, 17, maybe 17 that I do Diamonds. And then, then I go to art college and I get requests to play on people's records from that. So I was going in the evenings and like in the sort of weekends and on the breaks of term, and they just kept building and building and building to the point where I become a really, well, I must say that the whole thing about the session musicians and that whole world, that it was a really, really closely guarded sort of community, and you were a professional. You had no credit really on records. You just sort of go and play, and you're a hired hand. I didn't really know who I was going to be going in for in the early days. Maybe after about 2 years, then they'd tell you who you were going in with. But it was just, you know, you were just a hired hand, sort of phantom musician, really. So by this time, I was quite, well, I think I'd just about left art school at that point. And Jackie DeShannon came to England because she'd written some songs that had been covered by the Searchers, like Needles and Pins and When You Walk in the Room, etc. And she had a session at, that's EMI where that is, and she said, "Do you mind if I show you how it goes?" Because she used to write on the guitar. So I said, "Sure, go ahead." So that's her sort of showing me the guitar figure.
It must have been a great musical education working on so many sessions in so many different styles. And of course, later in your career, you became famed for being able to put so many styles into a single album. Did that come from the session years? No,
it really comes from before, you know, my musical taste and, you know, what you call like an eclectic taste. It was there right from the early days, really. And I think what it was the fact that it's the 6 strings of a guitar and how that could be sort of performed and exhibited, whether it was on nylon strings and the sort of more classical approach, or steel strings acoustic and the sort of blues, country blues playing, or the electric and the various styles of that, like bottleneck guitar and everything from sort of Les Paul through to rockabilly, etc., etc. I was there. I had a voracious appetite for all of it, and I was taking it in. So I'd already had that going on before I was going to art school, you see. So when I got the opportunity, when they took me into this sort of the bosom of like the music industry, which was the studio world, well, then I was not just a one-trick pony. I had all these different things. I didn't even realize it, but you know, I could play acoustic. I mean, I knew I could do it, but I didn't know that that they would take somebody on who was that versatile, because you think that, okay, they just want somebody who can do sort of, you know, R&B or whatever, but no, it was right across the board.
Now, in 1966, you joined the Yardbirds. Had you been feeling that urge to be in a band, to be out front on stage rather than just in the back room?
Well, I mean, I guess everyone might have heard this story, but I'm going to tell you that it was absolutely true. That when I went into the studio world, I could read chord charts, but I couldn't read the sort of dots and musical notation for real. But as time went on, I could. And as I said, I was doing all these various sessions, from sort of TV jingles to film music to this, to that, to blues, to folk, to on and on and on. And I got hired to an unusual studio. It wasn't one of the ones on the usual sort of Decca, EMI, and Pi. And I had like quite a lot of music in front of me, and I had to start reading it. And I just kept turning the pages, and it didn't stop. It just kept going on. It was getting really tricky. And I realized, well, it didn't take long to realize that it was a Muzak session. And I thought, what am I doing here? This is just really not what I'm cut out for, especially as I'd sort of introduced like the overdrive pedal, the fuzz box, into the whole recording scene, you know, and people were using them on stage, and I was sort of quite keen on some experimental things like the bow, etc., with the guitar, and I thought it's time to get out. So with this, with the Yardbirds, I mean, Jeff Beck and I go back to probably just after the Choir Boy photograph. We really were, well, when we met up, we both had like 2 homemade guitars, so that's how far we go back. So I used to go along with Jeff to the Yardbirds concerts, and there was an explosion one night, and the producer and the bass player, the same person, Paul Samuel Smith, decided to leave the band, and there was a big row between him and Keith Ralph, and he went off. That was the end of it. He wasn't going to come back in the band, and they were stuck, and they had the marquee coming up, and I said, well, I said, what are we going to do? You know, would you come and join the band? Chris Dreyer, who was a rhythm guitarist, didn't feel confident to do the bass, so I said, well, I'll do it then. And that's sort of how it worked. And Jeff and I had spoken a lot about doing like dual lead guitars, like the equivalent of like big band, what we knew as big band anyway, where you'd have like the trumpet sections and the saxes and that sort of aspect of an attack and assault on the audience really with it. We didn't really get that far with it. We did a bit of it, but then there were more fireworks and leaving and that in the Yardbirds.
Now, in retrospect, kind of legend sees this lineup of the Yardbirds as the 2 amazing stars of British electric guitar. But I guess at that stage, Jeff must have been the star, presumably.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because the work that he'd done in the Yardbirds was phenomenal. Because we know that there was Eric and then Jeff, but most of the work that Eric did was with that live at the Marquee, the 5 Live Yardbirds. But the work that Jeff did, he really brought it all on in leaps and bounds.
So was that a kind of testing thing to try and prove yourself against someone with Jeff Beck's reputation? Or
how do you mean? What, at the time?
Yeah.
No, at the time with Jeff, it was great because I had the opportunity to start doing the bow, and we were really doing some really interesting experimental things. But it only really comes together at the point of happenings 10 years' time ago. But once Jeff, once that sort of yet again another sort of break. And Jeff went from the band, then I had the opportunity to sort of do more of my own ideas, but we were sort of caught up in this trap with, because once the Yardbirds split, there were like 2 entities. There was the Yardbirds and Jeff Beck, now being managed by Peter Grant, and then they were both being recorded by Mickey Most. So, Jeff found it really awkward as well doing singles, but I mean, we found it real hell. It was awful.
Now, the violin bow. Eddie Phillips of The Creation had been using violin bows on stage, and I guess all musicians must take pieces of stagecraft from each other. Were you always on the lookout for good ideas that you could incorporate into the Yardbirds Act, into your performance?
Well, no. The thing is that with the bow, when I was a studio musician, I've got to say that in those days, the sort of string players hated what they called the rhythm section, which was the drums, the bass, and the guitarist. They wouldn't have anything to do with them, and it was just sort of, you know, they'd spent years on their bowing techniques, and they really sort of looked down their noses. But however, there was this string player, violin player, who was the father of David McCallum. David McCallum was in the series A Man from U.N.C.L.E. And well, I got there early. Well, I always sort of got there. I didn't get there late on the session, or you wouldn't be seen again. But he was sort of there a little bit early, and he said, have you ever tried to play the guitar with a bow? And I said, well, I don't think it'll work. It might do, but he said, and he handed me his bow, his treasured item of a violinist. It's only going to be the violin and the bow. He hands it to me and says, have a go. So I did, and it was interesting, and then I got my own bow after that. So I don't know. This is probably in advance of the Creation band, Eddie Phillips. I don't know, but...
Now, the Yardbirds, when you were with them, started touring the US a lot. You got onto the ballroom circuit. And did that give you a real feel for what was possible in America, both with the radio program and with the live circuit, those big rooms across the country that underground bands could play in?
Well, it's interesting because with the Yardbirds, I was so looking forward to going over there and actually playing, you know, in the States for the first time. I'd been to LA. I went there to go over and see Jackie DeShannon, but I didn't actually really play over there at that time. But to go with the Yardbirds to play, it was quite interesting because the first place we played was a shopping mall. Oh no, is this it? You know, we're going to play shopping mall. It wasn't a stage or anything. It was quite a shock. But along with that, we did actually play the underground circuit as well. And certainly by the time it was the four of us, once Jeff had gone, then it was really a very healthy underground circuit with all these places like, you know, the Fillmore and Winterland, Kinetic Circus, all these places. Yeah, so that was it. So we were doing all of that, playing the equivalent of the underground circuit, which was the underground circuit, and listening to what was going on the radio, which was the sort of stereo radio, the FM radio, which was in total contrast to the AM singles market. So here you've got the Yardbirds, who really are really appealing to the FM, or would be appealing to the FM stereo broadcast, but are still caught up in this awful trap of singles going on AM, and it's got nothing whatsoever to do with this band that are doing really experimental things on stage, like playing with the bow and having like tapes playing with like, like the Staten Island ferry coming into dock and express trains and all that. I mean, it was really getting very experimental. I didn't have too much to do with Goodnight Irene or whatever it was that poor old Mickey Mouse was giving us.
So the Yardbirds fell apart, and you had to assemble a new group to fulfill some contractual obligations.
Yeah.
I was wondering the other day, it struck me, if you hadn't had to fulfill those contractual obligations, would you have got a group together so quickly, and might the whole course of rock history have been different?
I didn't really have to fulfill the contractual obligations, but it was a sort of, it was something to aim for. I mean, they were in there, for the Yardbirds. And it really gave an opportunity to put a band together with all the sort of ideas that I had and things that were really clear and apparent as to what to do and how to present it in America, which was the underground circuit, which we'd already primed with the Yardbirds, and make a record that was going to hit this FM radio market. It was all quite logic, you know, it really was quite apparent way to go about it. But of course, then you've got to find the band. And initially, I wanted to get hold of Terry Reid because I'd seen Terry Reid on at Ipswich, I think it was, but it was on a grand tour, and the tour was with the Rolling Stones at the top of the bill, and then there was the Yardbirds, so we opened up after the second half. Peter Jay and the Jaywalkers played at Ipswich. They went on all of the tour around the UK, and then there was Ike and Tina Turner. So it was an amazing, thing. But I never forgot seeing this kid. He was 15, 16. He was about 16 at the time. And when the Yardbirds sort of decided to just dissolve, and I was trying to keep that band together, but anyway, they did decide. I couldn't understand why they'd had enough of it, really, with like 3 guitarists and locked in this singles sort of contract. This guy Terry Reid seemed to be the one that I wanted to access, but curiously enough, the office was sort of looking for him, and in the end, he'd signed a deal with Mickey Mouse. So that's quite a coincidence, isn't it, really? So anyway, he recommended Robert, and so I went to see Robert at a teacher's training college in Birmingham, and he had a band called Ob's Tweedle. And so I went to see Robert in Ob's Tweedle, and I thought, well, he's from, he's got a good voice there, and I brought him down to my house at Pangbourne. I gave him the idea that I said I want to put this band together, and I don't even know whether he even knew who I was, but I said, you come down to my house, and I'm going to play you some material, and give you an idea of what it's all about. So I played him like Dazed and Confused, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. I had the whole arrangement of that. And I played him some source material of Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, which was Joan Baez, live in concert. And I said, well, you sing that, you sing along the lines of that and those lyrics, and I'll show you this guitar thing. And if he hadn't have been interested in these ideas, and I would have been looking for somebody else because I knew exactly what I was going for, but it was really mutable, it worked well.
Now, here we have you in Olympic Studios for the first Zeppelin album. Now, the first track on the first Zeppelin album opens with a 2-chord punch on Good Times, Bad Times.
Yeah.
And that's something that crops up throughout the Zeppelin catalogue. Just off the top of my head this afternoon, I think this Whole Lot of Love, Levee Breaks, Out on the Tiles, that dum-dum that we get cropping up throughout. What is it about that particular technique, that particular sound that brings the songs to life? That kind of 2-chord punch, yeah. Yeah,
well, I think, that's... With Led Zeppelin, I've got to say that this is actually from, this picture's from Olympic Studio, and it is Studio 1, the big studio there, where Led Zeppelin 1 was recorded, but this is actually from the second album, but... well... No, I'm not correcting you on it. It's just I'm looking at it and just thinking, yeah, well, let's get this right, just in case you thought it was the first album. But it would have been pretty similar to that anyway. There's the Hammond organ there and everything. So, okay, I've gone right off the point. It's the impact, isn't it? Okay, yeah. It's with the Led Zeppelin, it's a performance that you're trying to capture on the recording of it. And I think the music was pretty dramatic anyway. And had these whole sort of peaks and valleys in the music. And also somebody said to me, and I've just come back from Japan, and they said, the mixing that you did was really 3D. And I thought, well, that's right, because you've got it. That's exactly what it was supposed to be. So they had all these sort of layers and depth, but you still really need to sort of capture people's attention more or less within the first few seconds, really. So when you've got something like Good Times, Bad Times, and you've got this sort of, the accents, and then this bass drum coming in, and people go, what the hell is that? That's what you want. And with the riff of Whole Lot of Love, it's got something which sets up this whole tension. Again, it's exactly what you want.
By this time, I mean, obviously, you'd done years as a session musician, so did how to get the best out of a studio and how to record in the most efficient manner possible come pretty naturally to you?
Well, it really was an apprenticeship when I was a studio musician. I mean, I was really keen to learn recording techniques, and there were things that I'd heard on records, and I had an idea that how they might have been done, but I wanted to know for sure certain aspects of the recordings of chess records. I mean, I loved all the sort of harmonica sort of effects with Little Walter, and which just goes right across everything with rockabilly guitarists and Sam Phillips, etc., etc. Johnny Bennett, rock and roll trio. There were certain aspects of things that I wanted to know how to go about getting this recording, and mic techniques, etc. Because I knew that they used limited mics, but how did they use them? Where did they put them in the room? I wanted to know all that sort of stuff. How did you get really complex tape echo and the limiting processing and everything? Yeah, it was... During the point of being a studio musician, you had to be on it all the time. You couldn't go in there and make mistakes because you wouldn't be seen again. So I guess really, you know, I must have been pretty good at doing all of this, but I was using it as a learning process. And as far as recording techniques went, and this whole aspect of being able to read music by the time I'm sort of in it for about whatever it is, a year, 18 months, it was all an apprenticeship, but it was a self-induced apprenticeship. But I realized afterwards that that's exactly what it was.
Now I'm going to quickly go through two photos here. They're taken 9 or 10 months apart. The first in Chicago, Zeppelin in a little club, and the second, you know, less than a year later in LA. And I think we get a measure there of how quickly Zeppelin got popular in America. Did you know you weren't going to be playing the clubs for long, that with the music of the power that you had, the arenas were going to be beckoning?
I think the one thing that is really interesting is the fact that the album, the Led Zeppelin 1 album was recorded in 1968, and it's like October, basically, in effect. Yeah, it's like the tail end of the last couple of days of September into October. But there was the Yardbirds broke up in July of that year, and there was no band. Suddenly, there's a band that we take over, but they rehearsed in my house. It's rehearsed in my house, and you know the material is really routine there. We go to Scandinavia, and to work it all, you know, to work it with an audience, and to get really have the whole thing really pliable between ourselves. Then we record it, and the album comes out really quickly. And we're over in LA before the end of that year. So we're recording in October. We're over there in December. By January, we've hit San Francisco, and we've basically just destroyed it. And it just keeps building and building and building. So you can show, like Chicago to LA, it was just the response and the wildfire of it, because you have to understand, this isn't the day of sort of twitting and the internet. This is just really just like Bush Telegraph. And everywhere that we played, we just kept getting more and more and more people, and the venues were getting larger and larger to accommodate the people that wanted to come and sort of witness, what is this band?
Did you have to, this is a very on something I've asked you before, but did you have to change the nature of your performance as you went from small clubs to huge arenas? Did you have to actually approach the shows differently when you're playing to 8,000 people instead of 800?
Well, it's interesting, because when I was compiling the Led Zeppelin DVD that goes back to the, it's got stuff from the Albert Hall. It was multi-track recording, but it's at the Albert Hall, which is whatever it is, it's sort of 1970, isn't it? And you can, well, it was the intimidating day of doing London, because you had all the press there, all the families are there, and that's the time when you're going to get a bit nervous, you know. But so there's a footage of that. And then you can see the confidence is thus really growing in the band. And the music is just taking on all manner of dynamics, and so is the actual literal performance of it as well. that's involving all four of us. You know, it's very physical music, and it seemed like it was just really pushing you and projecting you across the stage, and etc.
Now, here we are in Wales, the legendary retreat to Wales that led up to the third record. Now, you and Robert must have had a phenomenally close relationship after 2 years solid touring to go away to a cottage together in the middle of nowhere with no distractions.
Well, I think the whole group were offered the opportunity to go to Bromwell, but it was only 2 of us who made it in the end. Because it wasn't all mod cons, you know. It was literally gas lights there. And you can see that there's a candle up on the top left there. And yeah, it's a good old fire, and it was really cool.
You told me earlier this year that I think it was a Belgian girl at Piccadilly Circus misinterpreted your relationship with Robert based on this. When I interviewed you about the third record.
Well, no, it's quite true. There was Did I tell you this? Or
you
was
did.
This just been picked up?
It went in print, so you can't deny it now.
Yeah, well, there was this girl who was sort of giving out leaflets at Piccadilly Circus, and she's rather attractive, and I was going up to Scotland that evening, and I sort of invited her to come up to Scotland, and I had to sort out who I was to invite her up to Scotland, and she sort of knew about the third album. And she said, "You can't be him, you're gay." And what are you talking about being gay? I'm inviting you to Scotland. And she said, "Well, it's what's written on the album about this whole sort of thing of true completeness." And she thought that Robert and I were a couple, so that was a bit of... I've got to tell you, she didn't come up to Scotland. I walked off in disgust.
Moving on to the famous double-neck guitar, we won't talk about Stairway because we did that at some length the other week. One thing I will ask is a guitarist I know who plays the double-neck guitar sometimes says they play havoc with your back because they're so heavy. Is that right?
It's heavy. It really is.
Backache on stage when you're using that?
No. I hope you're going to show some of the pictures in a bit where it just becomes like like a balsa wood thing.
Now, you became known with Zeppelin for the strength of the stage image, with your custom-made suits.
Yeah.
Now, this is a handmade outfit as well. Now, but what's often quite surprising about the pictures of the early Zeppelin is it looks like you weren't really paying that much attention to how you looked. Was there a conscious decision to... I'm not taking the mickey here. I'm not taking the mickey.
What had happened was, so the beard starts growing at Bromwell, that's a fact, because it was like, it was like cold water and all that. It was a bit of a drag, just to think about shaving. And it sort of keeps growing, so I forget about the beard, it just keeps growing, and that's one thing. But that's at the Electric Magic show, okay, and a friend of mine's girlfriend had made this jumper, which actually I said, "Oh, I'll wear it if you bring it along." And actually, it was really short up here. We didn't. But I'm always one to stick to my word, so I wore it. I don't really care. So I thought people in those days it wasn't like a big screen projecting it, so people could see it. I thought, well, no one will notice really. Just listen to the guitar.
There is a range of slightly too short knitwear for sale in the foyer afterwards. Now, by the time we come to the Starship, when you're licensing your own airliner for your tours, you must be realising that the scale of your success has become inconceivably huge. Was that level of success a goal for you at the start, or was it just a byproduct of the music you made?
The level of success of having, like, the Starship? Well, it was a question of being able to sort of go into, say, New York, and unpack, literally unpack, and stay there for, maybe, a week and a half or whatever, and then commute out of New York to go to Boston, Philadelphia, etc., etc., And it's just something that came along with it, really. I mean, it's sort of blown out of all proportion, really. We weren't the only band to be doing this.
I think, yeah, every big 70s band
But
had
maybe
their
we
jet
had
with a logo,
more fun.
Here you are with Eddie Kramer. One of the great things about the Zeppelin records is the quality of the collaborators that you had with you. Did you always look for people who had particular skills that would complement your own, who could bring something specific to a record?
Yeah. Well, I looked for the best of people at that point of time. Pretty much the way to look at it, that each album was done in a different location, pretty much, and with different engineers as well. So Eddie Kramer did the second, a major percentage of the second album. He certainly did the mix with me on that. But this is 1973, and it's backstage at Madison Square Garden, where we actually record the concert that is actually going to come out as on the soundtrack of Song Remains the Same. So I've just gone, Eddie's sort of there, and I said, let's go and have a listen to what's going on in the truck. So I think this is what maybe it's during the drum solo, or maybe it's after the show altogether. Because you had ample time to go and review tapes and yeah.
Now, Song Remains the Same. It's viewed by many people as a bit of a missed opportunity, given what a phenomenal band Zeppelin were live, and many people think that How the West Was Won is a kind of better document.
Sonically,
yeah. How do you think, looking back at Song Remains the Same, do you think you missed a shot there?
No, well, what happened was, you saw the Starship just earlier on, and the film crew came to Baltimore, and Philly as well, to see the show, so that they would be au fait with what was going on. And we did 3 nights of filming. And then when we saw the rushes, they didn't have like the beginnings of the verses, and it was all over the place, to be honest with you. I think they were really out of it. In fact, I know they were really out of it. So we had to sort of do some recreating at Shepperton. So the thing is, yeah, was it a missed opportunity? It was a learning curve, and then it came to the point where there was a sort of well, there was work that was done on it. There was fantasy sequences that were done. And there was pretty much a decision that was made that we might just sort of shelve this and do it again with everything that we'd learnt from it, and how the film crew would have to really cover all of the singing, as opposed to just fraction. So then it came to the point where there was a rough cut done of it, but what with the timing of sort of the unfortunate accident that goes on in Rhodes, and Robert breaks his leg and stuff, then it became more of an issue to get it sort of put out.
For a lot of people,
but it could have been done and just shelved, to be honest with you, if things had gone well at that point.
For a lot of people, the 75 tour is the peak of Zeppelin live. Is the stuff in the vaults, might we one day see a live Zeppelin album reflecting that period?
Well, there is other recordings, although the majority of it really is showing its face one way or the other. And then the most important thing to take on board is the fact that there's little film documentary of the band. So it's not as though there's bits of Nebworth. Well, it's Nebworth, there's bits of Earl's Court, but it came out on the DVD beforehand. I mean, there are those things, but it's not as though we've got like lots of filmed concerts. I mean, I rather wish we had, but we haven't. But Song Remains the Same. I think it's really great for what it is, to be honest with you. I think it's marvelous. I think the performance is really good in it too. Yeah.
Here you are with Peter Grant, and the story of Zeppelin is almost inseparable from the story of Peter Grant. Could Zeppelin have been Zeppelin without him?
Not really. I don't think so. As far as the music for the first album, I mean, that was done, it was an independent production, really, is what it was, which is why Peter and I managed to go to Atlantic. We played one record company, I forget another, but we went to Atlantic because Atlantic was the one we were aiming at. And we were able to say that we weren't going to be singles market and all of that because it was an independent production, as opposed to going to a record company and saying, well, I've been in the Yardbirds, can I have an advance to start a new group? That would have been hopeless. So it was like, well, here it is. This is it. And Peter Grant was, he was the manager of the 4 Yardbirds, you know, and I'd known Peter Grant from beforehand when I was recording with sort of Mickey Most on various sessions like the Donovan stuff and all of that. And I'd known Peter, and we just got on really well. But his, with the sort of clout and the energy of this band, it gave him the opportunity as well to flex his managerial muscles just as much as we were flexing our musical muscles. And I mean, he did a wonderful job for the band in that whole side of business. That's not really my acumen at all.
Now, this is you with William Burroughs, and I guess one of the benefits of the position you found yourself in was the ability to meet anyone you were interested in, and so William Burroughs interviews you for Crawdaddy. Now, I'm imagining that wasn't a conventional rock interview, and he wasn't asking you much about mic positioning or anything like that.
No, the interesting thing about William Burroughs was the fact that I was contacted by the people from Crawdaddy, and they said, William Burroughs would like to do an interview. I said, are you serious? I thought they were kidding, because he was such a hero of mine, massive hero. And basically what he wanted to do was he wanted to write about rock and roll, or rock, shall we say. Let's say about rock, but more just as the way I would see rock music. I mean, I can relate exactly to what he wanted to do. He wanted to write about the trance aspect of it, and the riff and the power of trance music through that. And he was talking to me about Morocco, because he'd spent a lot of time in Morocco, and the musicians of the Rift Mountains, for example, the sort of Jujuka musicians that Brian Jones had recorded. And he was telling me about this, the power of healing through music, and it was fascinating. At the time, he was lecturing at a university in New York, and I just felt so honoured to be asked to do this. That he asked for me to do this, and he said that he'd been to Madison Square Garden and seen the concert, and I was really impressed with that, you know. And he said, "Oh, but I've seen more of your concerts. I see you more or less." When you come to Madison Square Garden, if I'm here, I'll go and see you. And I was really knocked out with that.
A couple of photos here. This is you at Earl's Court in '75. And this is Pontiac Silverdome, playing for 70,000 people indoors. Now, when you're playing shows like that all the time, how do you still get the adrenaline? How do you get that pumped up to go on stage when every show is huge?
Well, it was the excitement of actually playing in this particular band, because everyone was just so right from the beginning. Everyone, it's all 4 musical equals, and I think if I sort of explain it from myself, that I'd played some pretty fair guitar along the way with the Yardbirds, and during my time in the studio world, but certainly in the Yardbirds I was really developing. But when we came together as Led Zeppelin, even though it's a vehicle that I was aspiring towards, the fact that fate determined that these 4 musicians come together in a very, very short time, and they're all inspired by each other. Because on that first album of Led Zeppelin, I didn't play anything in that sort of realm beforehand, and it was like a tour de force on the guitar. And certainly John Bonham had never had the opportunity to play as John Bonham like he did in that, because he was given this opportunity and vehicle to really, really go for it. And he jolly well did, but everybody did. You know, everyone moved into a realm from what they'd done before, right up here in this category up here, and we're playing up in sort of the heavens, if you like. So, because in the recording world, that's what it was. It was a recording world, and that was really inspiring. But on the stage, the numbers would, once the numbers from the albums went into the set, then they would sort of mutate and change, and you could, every night there would be different sort of aspects to them that would come out of the playing together. So when you're talking about, or when we discuss like the energy of playing, or it was the fact of being able to go on and have this communion with the four musicians, and not really knowing exactly what it was going to be like, you know, because it would be different from the concert that was the night before that, or the night before that. They were all mutating, which is why the bootleg Led Zeppelin thing takes on so much importance, because people appreciate all of that.
Now, this is a fairly modest selection of guitars for a huge band playing 3-hour shows. I've seen indie bands at the Barfly with more than that for a half-hour set. Is that the tip of the iceberg, or was that all you needed?
Well, I was going to say there was a backup guitar for everything, but there's not quite, in case you broke a string, you know. But that was it. So if we're going from, we'll go from right to left. So we've got the guitar on the right, the double neck, which is going to do, that's going to do Rain's Song Remains the Same, at least. Then the one over to the left of that is the string bender, that's going to do 10 Years Gone. Then you've got the Dan Electro, which is going to do Kashmir in My Time of Dying. Then you've got the Les Paul, which is basically doing the main set between the three Les Pauls. The red one in the middle is another string bender. Sort of, it's got some mechanics in it, like that Brown Telecaster. And then you've got the acoustics as a backup in case there's a broken string. So they were all sort of there really because of tunings on guitars, and so that you could make the set relatively seamless without having to sort of tune up and just have a change of guitar. So it looks impressive, but they were all used.
Now, this is 1977. The final Zeppelin show in the US in Oakland. I mean, this is a show that has become overshadowed by incidents backstage. Do you regret that Zeppelin's career in the US as a live band ended in that way?
Well, I didn't.
I know this was
what you
not
mean. Maybe, well, what with
the incident with the security guard and.
Yeah. Well, of course, I'm playing on stage. I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's interesting about that is right on the left, you can see somebody half a face with sunglasses, and that is the road manager who's looking at me holding this guitar up in the air, and he's thinking, what's he going to do? Because I don't do this every night. And he's wondering, what's he going to do with it? But I wasn't going to do a Pete Townsend with these guitars. But I don't know whether there's another picture coming a bit later where I'm just holding one hand like that on the arm show. And yeah, it's a really heavy guitar, but I'm treating it like it's sort of balsa wood. It's amazing, really.
Here we are, we're on to Nebworth.
Yeah.
And the final UK shows for Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Now, you seem to have weathered punk. You were still as big as ever, still playing huge shows, a big audience. At this point, how did you envisage Zeppelin continuing? Were you thinking about the years ahead, or was it always just about the next record?
Well, at this point, we'd obviously recorded In Through the Outdoor. And actually, curiously enough, there were some copies of the album being sold there by all accounts, like white labels, which is a bit naughty, that somebody managed to do. But we'd done that. That was out the way now, In Through the Outdoor. And there was talk, John Bonham and I had spoken about what we'd do on the next album, and that was going to be sort of more of the more intense riffs, if you like. So that wasn't to be, but, you know, it's, Yeah, we were thinking that way. It was like that was like one stage. Like every album, you know, that's that stage completed. We'll move on to the next thing.
Now we're moving on now to the post-Zeppelin era. This is...
Oh, there we are, look.
This is the Arms tour.
That's a paper guitar, not even balsa.
You've been working with Paul Rodgers on the Arms tour, and the two of you decided to form the firm. Were you really badly missing being in a working band?
Well, we got together to do these. The original Arms concert was done at the Albert Hall, and Steve Winwood did some. He sang along on some tracks with me there. Because I really didn't have a solo career. That's all there was to it, really. And I had some music from a film track from Death Wish, and then a few sort of Led Zeppelin things to put together. I had Steve Winwood help out on these things. Okay, so he wasn't going to go to America because I wanted to do more concerts over there because it was a really good cause. It was for Ronnie Lane, and it was action research into multiple sclerosis. So it was a charity thing. And Eric and Jeff and myself had all said, yeah, we'll definitely do this. We did it for the Albert Hall. And then it was proposed to do some dates with my dear old friend Bill Graham over in the States. So again, I said, yeah, but I didn't have a singer, and I don't sing, and I wasn't really going to do this as an instrumental set. And Paul and I had spoken about it, and he said, yeah, he'd do it. So once we'd done a few shows over there, and we're coming to the end of the tour, it's silly now. We really know each other musically. Plus, we've got some material that we've got, like Midnight Moonlight, etc. And we should really move it on. It's silly just to sort of go off in two different directions. So that's how we came together and continued on as a firm.
Now, yeah, backstage we briefly discussed some of the 1980s fashions.
Yeah.
Was it difficult for someone who'd been one of the world's biggest stars in one of the world's greatest groups through the 1970s to find a new identity with a new group in the 80s?
A new identity? Well, I don't know. I just felt like I looked the same, really, as before.
I mean, your clothes are actually... I think you get away best there in the fashion stakes, probably, actually.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think that the fellow on the right had to sort of plug himself in the wall for a little while and the other chap sort of, well, he had a shaved head anyway, Chris Slade. So, yeah, it was a pretty interesting fashion statement from everybody there, really. But it was the 80s. And you're quite right. There were some unfortunate fashion statements made in the 80s, and I think that's not so bad compared to some of the others I can think of.
Did you feel that your audience for the film was expecting something different from you than what you could deliver? Were they really wanting you to still be Led Zeppelin somehow?
They probably would have liked us to have done, maybe we should have done, because some Zeppelin stuff or Bad Company even, wasn't it? Yeah. Let alone Let Free. Well, we didn't do any of that stuff. We just did everything sort of all bar that. What I do know is that if we'd have done either or any of those other incarnations of Paul's on my own, we'd have done a really, really good job. So actually, in retrospect, it was sort of noble to try and go out there and do something which didn't just sort of tip back to the past, but somehow, you know, it might have been good to have done some encores like that or whatever, but we were really sort of determined to go in with like a sort of fresh approach and be quite brave about it.
Now, you did go back to the past. I'm trying to find... the Live Aid picture is missing. You did go back to the past for Live Aid in 1985, which wasn't the greatest moment in Zeppelin history. Do you think the fact that that was an underwhelming appearance maybe also diminished the possibility of a Zeppelin reunion, or was that never really going to happen?
Yeah. Live Aid was appalling.
Yeah.
It was absolutely appalling because everyone was doing different things at that point of time. I mean, I was sort of working with Paul, and the Live Aid opportunity came up. And we didn't have to sort of play that much. So theoretically, as everyone was up up to speed individually, then we ought to be able to come together and I mean, it was really, really, really a wing and a prayer, this, and pull it off. But the fact was that the drummers they didn't know the material, so so we were in real trouble. And we had like half an hour to rehearse or whatever, or an hour, and we're still trying to get the drummer to do the opening for rock and roll. And it was said that Phil Collins knew the set, and so we went on in the end to this huge, massive audience, and neither drummer knew any of the numbers at all. And I've seen the footage of it, and there's this point where I can see on my face, it's like, oh my God, this is it. This is it. It's like a death knell. You can hear it ringing, you know.
For an appearance, you were so
So, you know, this was something like that, and, you know, the Atlantic 40th was, again, it was something that we went over there the last, well, we did do some rehearsals for that, and it seemed okay, except that we were kept waiting for hours, and that was like 4 hours waiting to go on, and by that time, you know, one had peaked. That's why, when it came to the point of doing the O2, it was essential to make sure that whatever we did at the O2, that would just erase all of these sort of silly sort of mistakes, you know.
In 1988, you released your first solo album, Outrider, and toured it with a new young band, including Jason Bonham. Now, I imagine it must have been quite intimidating for young musicians playing with you. Were you a patient boss?
What's that term, firm but fair? Yeah, well, I mean, Jason became quite wild after this tour. But no, I guess he was he was in pretty good shape on this tour.
And did you enjoy playing with a young band, being the leader of the group for yourself for the first time?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, because I'd figured that the album that I'd done, the Outrider album, was pretty okay, really. It was a really honest album. It wasn't sort of overproduced like a lot of the records were at that point in time. I wanted it to have a sort of honesty to it. And as far as I was concerned, by my standards, that was fine. So I was really more than happy to go out and play it live.
Now, you started working with a lot of different people through the 80s and early 90s. Here it's with David Coverdale. Was that because you wanted to work with different people, or was it you could never quite locate the right partner for yourself?
No, what it was, was that the album that I did, Outrider, was on Geffen Records. And he was on Geffen Records, and he'd had that sort of, the massive Whitesnake album, which I actually thought that was a really good album. If you think of a commercial thing, and what other people were doing, I thought it was quite a good album. And anyway, they were saying, would you like to work with him? And I thought, well, I was quite impressed with what he'd done, certainly on that album, the 87 album, I believe it's called, and some of the stuff that he'd done with Purple, but more so on that album. And I thought it'd be interesting to see how we get on, because, I'd had some musical collaborations with other people along the way, but I just thought I'd see how this went, and actually it was very fruitful, and we worked very quickly.
And you're still friends, aren't you? I went to the Whitesnake show at the Forum a couple of years ago, and I was standing about 6 feet away from you, and to be fair, no one around where we were was watching the stage. They were all looking at you, so...
I'll get on.
Here we are in Marrakesh, and what so many people had wanted for years was to see you working with Robert again. And when you came back together, did it feel natural to get back together again, or did it take time to get a working relationship going once more?
Well, it's really interesting because of the history of this probably isn't so documented, so it's good to be able to sort of share this with you. I was working with David Coverdale, and I was going to go to Japan with him, which I did. That's about all we actually managed to do was that tour of Japan. And I'd been requested to go and see Robert at Boston. He was at Boston, which was on the way to LA, where we were doing the rehearsals with David. And I went to see his sort of group at the time, and he had like maybe 3 guitarists, might even have had 4 playing. Well, I thought, wait a minute, I can do that on my own, really. And he suggested he suggested that what he said was, he said, I've got these loops. Would you like to have a go at them, you know, when you come back from like Japan or whatever? And I said, sure, I'd like to have a go at that. So he had these sort of drum loops that had been sent to him by this French producer called Martin Massonnier. And I don't know where these loops had been in between him saying that and me having a go at them. We went into this rehearsal room over, well, it's near King's, it's gone now. It's you know, the track from the Eurostar's gone over it now. But we went in this sort of really dingy rehearsal room, and he pulled out these loops, and it was just instant. It didn't take me much time at all to come up with what is shown on this, when we're playing in the square, which is The Truth Unfolds, or Yalla, and also, let's see, Wonderful One, which is done in the studio at LWT. And anyway, it was very instant. And it got to the point where it was, from working with the loops, the next stage was to go to Morocco. And then MTV were going to be filming it, one thing and another. So it was really something like a dream come true to actually go to Marrakesh and actually be able to play in the Jemal Efna, which is a big square, because I'd been there to see on vacations in the past. I'd seen musicians play there, and I'd also it was just something that would be really interesting to do. This is actually working with the Gnawas outside of Marrakesh, but we actually work with them at night as well in the square. So in the DVD of it, you see it going between night and day and stuff. But they were wonderful to work with, and it's really interesting because I went back there quite recently, and I met one of them in the square. He was still a Gnawa, and he was still playing, and he had a son who came up to me and said hello with a little hat to collect money, and it transpired that it was the son of this musician who's sort of over there, and it was really quite moving to meet him again, and then his son was actually going to school just more or less half a mile from where I live in London. I thought, hey, this is really spooky but good.
And here the two of you are on stage together. Did it feel special to be playing the Zeppelin songs again with the man who sang them?
Well, yeah, of course, it was really good. This thing sort of went on the road though, and the shows that we were doing were really, really good, and sort of better really in the performance and character than this, which is still good, but it was done before we were doing any touring. So yeah, it was good, really good to work with Robert. I mean, it was very fruitful as far as having new music and coming up with new ideas. It was cool.
Now, you also worked with the Robinson Brothers here and with the Black Crowes. You had the Live at the Greek album. Now, listening to that album, it seemed like it was done because it was fun to do. Would that be a fair assumption, to be playing the Zeppelin songs just with a good rock and roll band?
What happened was that there was a charity event at the Café de Paris, and Chris Robinson had come along to sing on it, and it was really great. They were playing I think they were playing at Wembley, and he came along and sang at this event, and their manager got in contact afterwards and said, would you like to reciprocate this? And it wasn't to do one charity event in New York or whatever, but to do a tour. And I said, yeah, because I really like Chris Robinson's vocals. I thought he was tremendous, and I knew he was tremendous just working with him on that stage in Café de Paris. So they're a great band, the Black Crowes. I thought this would be really good. The only unfortunate thing about the Black Crowes, the recording of it, was the fact that we did it at the Greek, and we did their music as well as like Zeppelin music, but their record label wouldn't let them do a re-record on it. So all the stuff that I did with them never came out. So basically what comes out with the Black Crowes is just the Zeppelin stuff, which is a shame from their side of it. I felt, you know, that wasn't right, but you know what record companies can be like.
And finally, for this part of the evening, it's the final ever Zeppelin show, the O2, the Celebration Day gig. Was this a good way to bring the story of Zeppelin as a working band to an end?
Well, it was certainly an honourable way of revisiting it. And you have to, you know, it was sort of over by 1980. And so there was just there were generations of people who knew Led Zeppelin's music. And it was an opportunity to be able to sort of play as a unit together with Jason, which, I mean, I played with Jason, or Jason had played with me, whichever way you want to look at it, on the Outrider tour in '88. But, you know, Jason was a really accomplished musician. He was then, even in '88. But it was something to really be able to do properly. Initially, it was put to us that we could do like 20 minutes. And it was like, well, there's no way we're going to do 20 minutes, you know. So a set was outlined, put together, and we did rehearsals, and we took it very, very seriously. Because Jason, we'd known Jason. Jason's song remains the same. He's sort of like 4 years old playing drums with his dad. We knew him as Jason, John's kid, you know. And Jason had to come into the band as Jason the man and Jason the group member. So there was rehearsals that needed to be done so that there was that confidence really within each other, each of us, you know. So that John Paul Jones and I worked with Jason over a period of time so that we could mutate the music and feel confident with it, so that when Robert came into the rehearsals, it would just be flying underneath him, you know. It'd be like a sort of raging animal, which it was, you know. So we did it, and we didn't have any sort of warm-up gigs. We just had like production rehearsals and that with the sort of the crew that we were going to use, and we went on there and did it, and it was great.
Did it surprise you that all those tens of millions of people applied for tickets for that, or do you think, well, of course they would, it's Led Zeppelin?
No, it became quite a phenomenon, didn't it? It really did, and yeah, there was only the one concert. Originally, there was going to be two concerts. There was going to be one of us, and then one of Eric Clapton was going to do the following night, but then he didn't do it. So I never really knew why we didn't do 2 nights, but anyway, we did the one night. So.
Well, in a moment, one of my colleagues is going to bring me some of the questions that you've submitted. But in the meantime, Jimmy Page.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, the first one from you lot. Trevor Rudge. Is Trevor Rudge here? Wave if you're here. We can't really see you. But Trevor asks, given today's environment for young bands with things like Pop Idol and X Factor, do you think Zeppelin would have made it if you'd been competing today?
What, on the...
Given the way that...
X Factor?
Maybe not directly on X Factor. I think you're more Britain's Got Talent.
How do you think Jack White would have done on X Factor? Yeah, sorry, what was that?
Do you think Zeppelin would have made it today, fundamentally?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I guess...
Well, the reality of it is it's just four extraordinary talents coming together and playing as one. You know, that's the thing, and that really sets it apart from even really amazing bands of its day, too.
And I guess also people romanticise the past, but if you look back at the charts of 1968, you'll find an awful lot of crap in there. It's not all, you know, Odyssey and Oracle and any of that stuff, is it? There's an awful lot of rubbish, frankly.
Oh, maybe.
Now, Carl and Simon asked, have you ever been asked to produce any other bands? And are there any artists you would like to produce?
Well, during the time of Led Zeppelin, I was very keen to keep it very sort of insular at the time. So I didn't do any sort of production outside of Led Zeppelin because, I mean, to be honest with you, it was I was just fully committed to what that was. I mean, I was committed to it before there was a Led Zeppelin, to the idea of what the you know, the overall task of it was, if you like, before there was even a band. I mean, I knew what my commitment was going to be to this. If I was going to do it, then I was going to do it and just do 36-hour days, you know. So there wasn't any time to be able to even consider putting that sort of effort and work ethic into another sort of unit or whatever. I did do some recordings with Roy Harper, but that's about it, really.
And you've never thought since, you know, you never thought on hearing a Jack White record, mind having a bash at producing him, but then I guess someone like Jack knows exactly what he's doing himself, doesn't he?
I think Jack knows exactly what he's doing, there's no doubt about that. He's remarkable, isn't he?
William T. asks, what's the thing you wish you knew when you were 16 years old?
What did I wish I knew when I was 16 years old?
What do you wish now that you had known when you were 16?
Well, I tell you what, I'll ask that question of everybody in the house. and you would have a multitude of answers, wouldn't we? I don't know. There's no one thing that I could answer that with.
Here's a specific one then from Andy Adams. What's your favourite guitar amp setup?
Well, favourite guitar amp setup. Well, unfortunately with me, it's numerous, you see. But on the first album, there's a little amplifier that's called it's a Supro amplifier, and it's just got a little small speaker in it. It's literally about this size. And that whole album was done with one Fender Telecaster guitar and that amp. And yet it sounds huge, and yet it's just this little tiny amplifier. So, I mean, you can't find those amplifiers anymore anyway, but yeah, I'm quite happy using Marshall amplifiers too, though, when it gets more powerful.
Now, Lyndall Reed doesn't quite ask which one of your children you prefer. He asks, which song are you most proud of and why?
No, that's tricky. They've all got incredible. They're all individual. They're all played in such a way that they are all very different to each other. The time, well, there's more than one, you see. The fact, the enduring quality of something like Whole Lot of Love is really quite extraordinary. And the fact that they're all those sort of mashups that I've seen, like, on YouTube, would it be? But with, like, James Brown and the Whole Lot of Love. And there's all these versions of Whole Lot of Love with various visuals and mashups that people have done. And so that's pretty, that's pretty amazing that there's been this sort of, that's been a point of reference to people to want to even do all of that. I mean, there's one with James Brown, as I say, that's just astonishing. Yeah, I mean, Kashmir was something which is really extraordinary. I guess it's all the ones that everybody really knows. I mean, Achilles' Last Stand was something that I really thought was pretty amazing at its time too. But just plucking them out of the air like that, there's something about all of the tracks that I can really relate to. That's why they're sort of on the albums, if you see.
Actually, talking of versions of your songs, how did you feel about that version of Whole Lot of Love being the top of the Pops theme forever? Because when I was a kid and I first heard Led Zeppelin 2, I thought, what have they done to the top of the Pops theme? This is terrible. It didn't take me long to know better, but...
Well, it was interesting because we went to the States and we played in San Francisco and it was just instant from that point. And that was in the January of '69. And then we spent a lot of time going to America, because if you could see that door just sort of crack open, then you're going to kick it down and just go marching in and, you know, sort of being quite bombastic about things. So we played sort of dates here, but there weren't so many of them. But then that got taken up because first album came out, of course it's on the second album, it becomes a theme for Top of the Pops as an instrumental. So by the time we come back and we're playing, you know, a Whole Lot of Love in the set, there was this sort of thing, well, maybe people think it's Top of the Pops that we're playing and not a Whole Lot of Love. So...
Oliver Burdett, who says that you are the reason he plays guitar, says that as a young guitarist, he sometimes lacks inspiration. What are the things that inspire you when nothing seems to be working?
Well, it's quite easy, really. It's the records that really turn me on in the early stages of things, and they can still have a real profound effect on me listening to them. So whether that can be blues, or it can be sort of certain rockabilly things, or Les Paul or whatever.
The amazing moment, and
it
it might be loud when you're in your house and you put on Rumble by Link Ray.
Yeah.
And you're dancing around the room playing air guitar like a 13-year-old all over again.
Well, that's it, because but underneath it all, I'm just a real fan of it also, of guitar music and various styles of guitar music as well. That's always been part and parcel of what I've been all about and what I've tried to reflect through things like the first album of Led Zeppelin. That's exactly what that is. That's supposed to be showing so many applications to various styles of guitar playing, acoustic, electric, bottleneck, and everything. You know, it's all part of the whole large picture for me, really.
Eric Richardson asks, will you ever reveal the meaning behind Zoso?
No.
An anonymous one here, but an interesting one. How would you describe the difference in sound between the original LP pressings of Zeppelin and the current remastering of the catalogue?
Okay, well, the thing is that the very first... Let's go back to the point of Led Zeppelin 2. Because after Led Zeppelin 1, we'd really made such an inroad in America, and we've really changed things over there, that Led Zeppelin 2 was so eagerly anticipated, and it was a really good, it was a really good album. That's all there is to it. But when it went to the pressing plant, you get a test pressing, and it comes back and it jumps. So now that the record company are they're in, you know, they've got their knickers in the twist, so to speak, because they want this album. We want to put it out, and the first test pressing is jumping. So what has to be done is it has to be recut with the level taken down, so they can sort of press in you know, hundreds of thousands, so without getting any returns of the thing jumping. So what happens is when you with these albums, that you find that the first test pressings are pretty good, but once they get them on the production line, then the quality sort of it starts to disappear a bit or lack. So with the new, with all of the advance of technology that is sort of preceded the point that that I could revisit the albums and recut them, then it gave the opportunity to give the best possible quality at this point, and really actually, by hi-fi standards, this is in, you know, like reviews in hi-fi magazines, that they're you know, that they're better than what the original ones were, which of course that's always the object of the exercise, to improve on everything that you're doing. So that's really, that's like mission accomplished, if you like.
Kevin Witcher wonders, how important was the album cover artwork to you, and what was your favourite Zeppelin cover? Well,
I think the artwork was always, certainly in the days of LP records, it became like quite an art form. And everyone was, you know, bands and individual solo singers or whatever were treating it in that way, and the record companies. It was really important to have evocative artwork on the covers. But then it got to the point by the fourth album where we didn't have any information at all, no title and no name of the group, and this caused quite a bit of friction with the record company, because they said, no, you've got to have this, you've got to have that. I said, I'm not going to do it. And yeah, they came in with all sort of, actually it was myself and Peter Grant who went to Atlantic Records with all of this, and they were bringing in all these sort of statutory books with legal this, that, and the other, and I said, well, we're not going to do it. So that's what you had to do, really. You had to put your foot down. So there was an album that came out basically with no information, and then the album that follows it just has like a belly, what they call a belly band on it. Again, that's really got no information on it too. So yeah, we were able to, we had some sort of clout, and so it was foolish not to take full advantage of how you could push things around and move it, and then put out albums with no information on and see what's going to happen. Because it was a calculated risk, because I knew how good the material was on the fourth album, and it was imperative really to get the whole thing right, and not just throw this opportunity away. And so it was worth pushing the record company. And of course, yeah, it was tough. They had all their legal people in and everything. So you can't do this. You've got to have the name of the record company, or you've got to have the group's name. I said, no, we're not going to do that. We'll do it differently.
Presumably you also had the record label's accountants coming in when you had things like, you know, die-cut cover for physical graffiti, the brown paper bag through the outdoor, the spinning disc with 3. Going, can't you do something cheaper?
Well, 3 was definitely a bit of a problem for them, yeah, because that was really difficult to construct that with this moving wheel. So we got more difficult with them, really, as time went on. so they sort of got over the trauma of having to do something with a moving wheel in it, to the point that now this band doesn't want to put their name on the album. Yeah, it slowed it up. It slowed the album coming out, but, you know, it was the right way to go about it.
Keith Stewart asks, do you think your achievements as a producer deserve as much recognition as your achievements as a songwriter and performer with Zeppelin?
Well, thanks, whoever that was, yeah. Yeah, I guess so, really, yeah. Yeah, that's it.
It's a yes or no answer, really, isn't it?
Well, it is really, you know, and the thing is that the actual sort of sonic perspectives of the albums are really, you know, were really calculated, and they were meant to have all this sort of depth to them, and it was good to be able to remaster everything, because by the time it comes down to sort of the MP3 file, and it comes down to sort of, it just really starts getting squashed, and it was sort of said like they all sound like they've been mixed by the same recording engineer. They just get so sort of squashed down, and it loses so much of the dynamics that's in there in the Zeppelin music. So I was really more than keen to be able to remaster all the stuff again. And yeah, it wasn't before time, really.
Annie asks that, Jimmy, seeing as there's been so much photographic intrusion in your life, are there any plans to make a volume 2 or volume 3 of this book? Because she says she'll buy them all.
Oh, that's very kind of you. It was really interesting to do this because I knew it was going to be an epic, but the amount of photographers that you had to deal with was really, I mean, it's a fascinating world, the world of photographers. And the fact that in the past, in the days of Led Zeppelin, you get loads of contact sheets, but now you'll find that the photographers would have their images with agencies, and you'd only get selective images. And I go, yeah, but I remember there was this photograph and that photograph. They may not have got used at the time, but I know the photographers got them. So it was a real sort of trawl to bring everything in, you know? And that took quite a lot of time, really, getting right to the nitty-gritty of the photographer's files rather than stuff that had been sort of serviced to agencies. And it took quite a long time, but it was worth it to be able to give a really sort of an honest picture of like a life in music, because that's basically what this is.
And Patrick Casey asks, it's been 34 years since the breakup. After all that time, how do you feel about the longevity of the music? And you're still so significant to millions of music lovers worldwide.
Yeah, well, I think what it is, without doubt, is the quality of musicianship from everybody that is a member of Led Zeppelin, you know. And as I was saying earlier about, you know, my guitar part of it was that even though I had this, you know, the whole idea of what the band was going to be before we even had the band, you know, I mean, I knew exactly what sort of material to be doing. But I hadn't played guitar in that way. And none of the other members of the band had played to that degree and intensity, because the gel of the four of us was just phenomenal, and that unfortunately that does get captured on the recordings, without saying that happens. Yeah, it was an extraordinary privilege to have been in a band like that, and the way that it came together so quickly was almost like it was divine intervention putting us together, really. But we were there, and it was sort of on a mission to sort of change things, not just. And that was a good thing about not putting out singles, because we didn't have to keep getting rooted back to this format. We could just keep expanding, and that's it. The musical expansion of it is clearly what it was. So and because the musicianship from everybody on there is just so fine, that every year it's new musicians and new ears are coming to listen to it, because it's four guys at the top of their game, and unquestionably, and it takes on this fifth element, and yeah, it's gone through the years in that way. So Led Zeppelin hasn't been something that's just you know, had a sort of moment every sort of 8 years or something like that. It's because of the sheer musicianship of those, you know, master musicians that are on it, and the way that they play together and weave is the sort of thing you can hear Led Zeppelin, but if you really listen to it, then you get all this counterpoint that's going on, and it's just brought musicians to it every year, and that's fantastic. It's great.
Ladies and gentlemen, the great Jimmy Page.
Thanks. Thank you.
What I wanted to share with you today is my concern about education, not just in Africa, but everywhere. It's seen like a privilege.